So a few things. If you remember, when you create a new level, and you're gonna have to do this on your own, you want to create a new level and you want to select it and make it current, right? So how do you do that? Yeah, well, you can duplicate it, you can rename it and drag and drop it over, right? So that's how you do it. And you also need a new Skysphere. So you need to turn off the exponential fog sky atmosphere. In this case I've already done it, as you probably know from the later videos. And I want to go into engine content. I want to make sure it says show engine content if you don't have it. I want to look for the sphere inverse normal, so I want to drag and drop it in here. I want to make sure the scale is, for example, 50,000. You can see it here. Plus this yellow one to put it in the middle, okay? Because we're doing static version now, so you understand different scenarios, different solutions, and also hopefully get a better understanding of exposure based on the differences, so you get like a general understanding of what it actually is going on. Then we want to assign a material, right? So how do you do that? Well, you want to go to a website. So for example, noemotion.hdrs.net, go to evening HDR, and you want to download, for example, an Overcast lighting from here. And I picked 415, so right click here, save link as, and it will give you the folder and RAR. You unpack it, right? And then you drag and drop it into your folder. And I've already done that, in the sense that I have drag and dropped it over here. Then I have right clicked and I've done a new material, and I've just simply drag and dropped this one over like this, right? I pressed M to add multiply. I pressed 1 to add the integer. I searched up absolute world position, right? Called world position in this case. I made sure the shader itself was unlit, connected it all to emissive color, and I put in 10,000 in value, because we are using still PBR physical correct values, so we're gonna do that. And when you do that, obviously the way we're doing it here, and then you drag it drop over here. And in your case, because I've already been playing around ahead of time, it might be super white, and that's because of the exposures you have and settings. So you'll notice that if you put it on 11, 12 area, you'll see that you start seeing stuff. And we'll go through this in the next videos, as obviously, and this will all make sense why EV is important. Even if something is bright, it doesn't mean you need to adjust the sky down, right? If you go into the game setting, it's now on 1. That's literally what it is. It has a value of 1. So if I do this and I go here, that's basically what's going on. It doesn't mean you have to go here and click 1. That's not correct. That's not PBR value or exposure values physical accuracy. Because EV1, what is EV1? Do you remember? Exposure chart value. What is EV1? EV1 is where's the chart? So random all the time. Let's just pick exposure chart value. This one. So what is this? EV1 is distant view of lighted skyline, right? But we are doing overcast, so we are looking for 11 to 13. But when we go to 11 to 13, say we go to 13, suddenly it's dark. So these are the things we're going to work on. But set up this and then watch the videos, and hopefully it makes sense. Cool. Thank you. Alright, this video, just for the record, is heavily edited down. It's actually an hour worth of content, but efficiency and things can be explained quicker afterwards. So we have this sphere inverse that we already added. We do need to organize things a little bit, so it's a good idea to add new folders. So all of these lights, you know, you can select like the cinematic lighting into a folder called cinematic lighting, the local lighting into a local lighting folder, the natural lighting into a natural lighting folder, and the post process and all the lights, you know, into its own thing if you needed to do that. So that's basically the first thing we want to do, is kind of organize these things very quickly, and you can do that now if you want to. You should have done this basic sky material by now. As you can see, that's an unlit shader, has a multiply, has an integer which has 10,000 value in it, the texture sample, and the absolute world position for the UV. The EV might be different for you, but generally we'll be tweaking it around. I've turned off the game setting and kept the EV around 11 for now. This is because we are doing Overcast, and it tends to be between 11 to 13, right? So that's something you want to do as well, is to keep it simple and follow along as best as you can. So a reminder, we are still using the references. So the brightest sunlight 120,000 lux, what we left it at, which is obviously too much because we have an overcast lighting right now. So we want to go down to 20,000 or even 1,000 to 2,000, right? Because light is occluded. So if you look at the exposure value, we are staying between 11 to 13, right? So we are trying to figure out which one suits our sky, basically. That's kind of what we're trying to figure out. So remember, the sky, it's an overcast, light is occluded, there's pollution, there's gonna be fog, so you wouldn't have that much anymore. And I see I have some missing cubes, so I'm just gonna quickly add that back as well, so we have that. Okay, next we are gonna turn off the lights, so you only can see the skylight. So directional light, expressional, fog, and sky atmosphere, both, they're all off. We only want to measure the skylight, right? And the reason for that is to keep things a bit simple. We want to measure the EV of 11, for example, and we want to look at the sky and go, does this make sense for our sky? Probably not, might be too bright, right? So it is very bright because of daylight setting. So if you remember, it is quite high up at the moment, but we'll tweak that afterwards. That's why it's off. So we're only focusing on the skylight, so it's not being affected by the daylight, but it's still bright despite that. Looking up the sky, you know, we are measuring quite a lot of lux in 12 EV, and you have to ask yourself, is this matching the lighting that you want, or do you want to do something differently? So let's go into the Joey Lens page and just quickly look. 11 to 13, and we kind of have a deep shade, I think. Let me just. So 11 sunset subject in deep shade, 12 subject in open shade or heavy overcast, 13 subject in cloudy bright light. So we probably want to stay within 11 or 12 because it is quite you know, overcast what we see in our type of skybox that we picked. So let's change it to 12, and you can see it's matching a little bit more now. It's starting to look a bit more overcast based on what we have on the sky already, which is on 10,000 brightness at the moment. So with that said, we want to make sure we also recapture the skylight. Next, we want to adjust the directional light. It doesn't make sense, as I said earlier, to have 120,000 or 130,000. Yes, it is daytime, and you might think, oh, it says in this guide it should be 120,000, but that's not how it works. As a lighting artist, and even as an artist, you should know that the lighting changes based on the pollution, type of cloud, sky, you know, a lot of issues, and even the angle of the light will also reduce the lux. So we are simply gonna add it down to a value that makes sense. This is too bright, it's too contrasty, it doesn't even look like overcast. If you go outside of the overcast, you would know that the shadows and the bright side should be almost identical flat. But we have to be creative as well. So we're gonna keep it maybe around 2000, which is also like a range that's on the Joy Lens references. And now you can see it kind of starts to mesh a little bit. We do need to be artistic in the sense that if this was a multiplayer or a game level, you do want to often have contrast, so you can see the shadow on the left side, for example, and that's pretty common that you always have in the games, at least, because the art directors, they tend to be picky and they want to see stuff, and the level designer also want to see something. So that's why we always have a little bit of overexposure, or a little bit more than it is in the real life. So you know, you can see the difference, and that's all good and dandy. Gonna click recapture just to see if anything happens. I guess I forgot something. Okay, I did a quick rebake. It's always important. The next thing we want to do is play with exponential Heightfog. Okay, you can see it's black. That's not good. The reason for it being black is because even though I go in and I increase it to white, you don't see any differences. That's because we are obviously still working with realistic values, physical accurate approach. So these color picker and the color and the way the exponential Heightfog now works with the static sky it's not physical accurate. So for that reason, we need to add the information in this exponential Heightfog. That basically means we need to not only change the color this time, because we want to control it, so we want it to be more towards blue to match the sky, you know, dark blue, gray blue, whatever. We want to keep that with sunlight on, but it doesn't really matter. Okay, so if you go into the color picker of this exponential Heightfog and we pick a bit of a blue color, you would think it changes. It doesn't, because the value that when we pick this and we slide it up is 1, and we want it to be really high, and let's say we do 4000. Alright, now we see something, but obviously the color doesn't match and it might be too bright, so we need to play around with it. We need to kind of get it to work well with our sky and general lighting. And that's, again, this is why, even though everything is trying to be physically correct, you still need to learn what to look for. You're still in control. You need to train your eye. You need to know something's off. So let's make sure that this actually is has the color and the value we want. And I do think if you try 5000, it looks like it, but it kind of separates a bit too much, so it might be too much. And we kind of know that the physical values we have in the environment is correct and that's how we want it, we can see that the sky is too bright. So we actually wanted to go backwards and dim the fog a little bit more down. But there is another way to do. Once we have it like this, we can control the fog density and kind of make it spread out a little bit as well. So even though I go down in the value to 2500, you know, there's still a line there in the background. So play around with the values, because you might have a different look, you might have a different intensity you're going for, but it's very important to train your eye to spot these differences. And next we just want to quickly do the fog density down to 0.2 or 1. There you can see it's starting to blend now with the more or less correct color choice and the technique of making it blend into the sky or the sky into the fog. It now looks consistent and in one area. Obviously the inside isn't visible just yet because the post-process is still off. Okay, so we still need to rebake for this kind of stuff, because there's still lighting information in the fog. The fog scattering, Heightfog, it actually contains information that affects the lighting, so we want to make sure that we do a quick rebake before we continue here as well. Okay, everything looks okay. Let's go inside, and it's obviously very dark inside. So the average EV outside is 12. The average EV inside can go between 5 to 7. Now pay attention that the EV and the lux is between 7 and 8, and outside is 12. Okay, now that will not change even if I change some of the settings later on. It will still stay within the same range. So if I turn on the post-process volume, or we go into the post-process volume, remember we already have an exposure curve, right? And what happens with this post-process volume and exposure curve is, without the exposure curve, the EV and Unreal Engine will try and average out the grayscale, meaning it will do 127, 127, 127 if I don't keep the exposure curve on. So that basically why we use exposure curve, is to tell Unreal that, hey, you are turning everything to average. We don't want average. We want this dark area to be this amount of brightness. We want this brightness to have this amount of darkness, or vice versa. And you can see the post-process is on, but the EV is still the same. It didn't really change a lot. Still between 7 and 8. It doesn't make that big of a difference because it's different. The physical measurement we see and the histogram is different than what we see as a human being in terms of brightness. So going into the exposure curve, I'm going to delete this one node because we don't really need it. It's actually a pretty bit overkill. So let's delete that. Okay, we will obviously change this if needed for artistic reasons, but this kind of works. Again, there's nothing wrong with keeping this kind of exposure curve and just keeping the lighting as it is, because it's still under an overexposing, which you can see on top left. You know, the number changes, but it stays within -1 to 137 to 122. So if you go to the darkest corner, it says -1.2 on the top left, because the curve is still doing its work. It's still making things darker and brighter, and making sure that Unreal doesn't do average out, which it would if I started turning off the exposure curve. Everything would be equally bright and equally dark, which is why we're using exposure curve. But I do want to make it a bit more creative decision. I want it to be a bit darker, to be fair. I want to see that it's darker. That doesn't mean the EV and every physical would change, but I want, from a creative point of view, as a viewer, I want the image to be darker. And to do that, we have to go into the exposure curve a bit again. Opening the exposure curve. What I'm going to do, I'm going to add a new keyframe. And I'm going to make sure it's around 6. And basically what it's saying that when the EV is 6, I want to change it and I want to make it darker. So 6 or above. And I want to add -3. Okay, so that will make sure it's darker, because I'm saying that anything above 6, I want to make sure there's less light coming into the camera, essentially. And I just want to right click and go to it. Okay, select both and then right click and then O2, just to, you know, smooth it out a little bit, basically, so the transitions isn't too jaggy. Now you can see the scene is already darker, but pay attention, the EV is still within the range of 5 to 8 or 5 to 7. Obviously there is some bleeding because this is preview bake. So you can see now this is more like what I want the overcast to be, basically. And ignore the extra characters and stuff. I'm just playing around. You don't have to do that. It's very bright near the character because we still have some old cinematic light on there. But let's look at these lights, local lights, a bit quickly. So for the local lights, well, we're gonna increase the luminance so it's kind of brighter. We're gonna add 5000 lumens. It's just to make it pop a little bit more, because in Overcast, you know, you would see the light more, and we kind of had lower luminance to begin with, to be fair. Attenuation radius, I probably wouldn't play around it too much. If we do, we need to rebake, and we also want to make sure it's optimized, so that's why we're not increasing it in this case. But from a creative and lighting point of view and non-game view, you probably want to increase the range so it hits a little bit in other areas if you wanted to. I'm not going to do it for time saving, but again, you could if you wanted to. But then remember, you're not doing game optimized lighting anymore. Okay, cool. Other than that, you know, it's fine. It looks like an overcast. You see the interior light better now, because unlike daytime, you can see the interior light more. So you could again brighten it and do your tweaks if you wanted to. So that's good. So now you know how to quickly do an overcast lighting as well. This was a sample of one of the time of days in the Polar facility game ready lighting baked that you can learn over at lightingbot. If you want to support us with our ongoing free content, please consider buying this course for 50% discount at the moment. Link is in the description. Thank you so much.